live on custom live streaming service.
Yep, this will be on
Wow.
Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter.
Okay.
That's daunting.
My name is Lucia Wilkes-Smith, and I'm representing WAMM and the WAMM Fundraising Committee today, and welcoming Dorothy Van Soest, our renowned author of the day. And I say welcome to all of you. I think there are people who are connected to us right now who are zooming in from all across the country. And I do want to say, just before we start Dorothy's piece of this book event, that throughout the area we call the United States of America, we do understand, don't we, that land was taken from Indigenous people by deceit and by violence. And in the state that we call Minnesota, there are 4 Dakota communities in the southern portion of the Minnesota and 7 Ojibwe communities in the north. And so we recognize those peoples, and we invite all of you here today who have joined in Dorothy's book event to consider the land on which you are living and its many legacies, and to critically reflect and to engage in conversation and action toward resolution of some sort. So keep that in your mind and your heart. Dorothy Van Soest, as we wrote in the letter, in the beginning of WAMM, Dorothy was employed at the time at the University of Minnesota Department of Social Work, and she and her colleague Mary White wrote the book Empowerment of People for Peace in the early 1980s or mid 1980s as a way to organize WAMM people to understand that with some information and facts and the support of colleagues and friends, we can take action to press for social change. So that booklet was very important to Dorothy. And I knew as a staff person from WAMM at the WAMM office in the late 80s and early 90s, I was aware of Dorothy at the University of Minnesota. I was aware of her work at WAMM, also through the Honeywell Project. But I just learned from Father David Smith that he and Dorothy team taught the first Justice and Peace Studies course at what is now St. Thomas University. So I wasn't aware of that at that. And so it's been great fun to read and get to know Dorothy and her character Sylvia Jensen in Nuclear Option, and to enjoy the characters and the story, but also to learn some very serious information. So I invite you now to listen and watch, and Dorothy will carry us forward. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you. And actually, I was at the University of St. Thomas starting in 1980 and worked very closely with Father David Smith in starting the Peace and Justice minor, which I understand is now a major there. And there are people here from the University of Minnesota, where I was before that. And I'm just delighted that you're all here. I think we're going to have a little fun. It's a little daunting to think that it's being live streamed because I may make some personal comments because it feels more like an intimate gathering with so many of you who I've known over the years here. But I'm going to do a slideshow because you don't want to just have a talking head. And so I'm going to take a minute to hope that the screen share works.
Dorothy, I'm interrupting here for a second because I want to remind people that when Dorothy finishes her presentation, we will have some time for questions and comments. And we also will, at the very end, because you know WAMM's policy of not having a meeting without some kind of action coming out of it, we'll have an action suggestion for you. So, and that will come naturally from the material that Dorothy is presenting. So plunge ahead, Dorothy. Sorry for the interruption.
That's all right. Sophie, if you could maybe, I can't touch the share screen because I can't get out of the participants spot. Can you get me out of the participant list?
Yeah, sure. I can work on that. Does that help?
It says merge with video, but I don't know if I should do that.
You can do share screen. At the bottom, that's the green button.
Well, the green button on mine is at the top, but it won't press because I'm in the participants space where it shows the list of all the participants.
Why don't you get out of the participants space? Can you click on participants and it will go away?
No, it won't.
Okay, well, you can send me the slideshow in the meantime while you troubleshoot getting the slideshow to work on your end. And worst case scenario, I can play it myself.
I don't think I can send it to you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, folks. It went perfectly before.
How about?
I can get out and come back in.
How about share screen? If you just punch on share screen again.
No, it won't do it. For some reason, it won't do it.
Huh. Huh.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm really sorry.
Okay, well, we'll say good evening for a moment and come back in. Do you want to try that?
Could you stop recording maybe for a minute?
I'm going to play a song in the meantime and put the lyrics in the background. It's a song that Dorothy wanted to share. If you have any words to share about it, Lucia or Dorothy, feel free. Otherwise, I'm just gonna.
Let me introduce it. A friend of mine in Texas wrote a song after reading my book and knowing about the story of atomic veterans, which the plot is about in the book. And she wrote this song and she recorded it. And so why don't we play that now?
Young soldiers who fought a war, making sure it was run for good, trusting rules and each other to do what must be done, till that day burned in the hearts of every man, still brings tears to their old soldier's eyes, a testament designed, oh, way to the very gates of hell on earth. they'll stand and be counted. Brave brothers with no voice, long gone to their eternal rest. All the rest atomic best, fighting to survive the burning touch of evil's brightest light. Time to show their grit and tell a story of the truth, lest we all forget. And they'll stand and be counted, home of the free and the brave. No evil will surmount them, but they'll stand and be counted. And we'll stand and be counted, home of the free and the brave. No evil will surmount us, 'cause we'll stand and be counted. Yes, we'll stand and be counted.
All right, I'll take over.
Only one person at a time can share a screen. If someone else is trying to share it, it won't be cutting you off.
Yeah, nobody else is trying. Yeah. Okay, folks, let's go to my speaker view. Can everybody see me? I see Father David Smith in my full screen.
We all see you in the full, I see you in the full screen, Dorothy. Go
Okay.
ahead.
All right, thank you. Okay. I'm going to punt, guys. I think we're going to have a talking head after all. I'm really sorry. I had a really hot slideshow, but that song kind of kicked it off in terms of what this book is about. And I want to give a little preamble that what I really wanted to talk about tonight, in addition to my book, is the power of storytelling as a tool for change. After decades of academic writing, I've come to believe that how we experience events in our world and how we see our role in relation to them is most profoundly affected, even shaped, not as much by objective data and theoretical discourse as by the personal connections we make through the stories we tell and the stories we're exposed to. So in retirement, I decided to take the social issues I've grappled with over decades of teaching and academic writing and turn them into stories with characters that would evoke emotion and hopefully reach a broader and more general audience. Stories that would hopefully not only inform, but mobilize people to take action. I call them my social justice novels, and Nuclear Option is the latest. When I tell people it was just published, the first question they usually ask is, what is this one about? And then when I tell them, they say, well, why did you write that? And then when I talk about that a little bit, they usually seem interested in knowing more about how I decided on the characters and the plot and how that all happened. So that's the agenda. I want to tell you what the book is about for those of you who haven't read it. I want to tell you why I wrote it. And then I want to tell you how I wrote it, how it came about. So the what? What is nuclear option about? Well, for any of you who've been to any of my previous book readings, I can go on and on and on about telling the whole plot because I know the story so well. So I'm going to read to you my 100-word elevator pitch about what nuclear option is about. It's a mystery suspense thriller wrapped around historical events during the nuclear disarmament movement in the 1980s and the current issues surrounding nuclear technology in today's volatile atmosphere. My sleuth, Sylvia Jensen's story unfolds in 2 periods of time. In 1984, she was in love with Norton, an atomic veteran and fellow peace activist. In 2019, at age 77, and with her activist days behind her, she is drawn back into the fight by the unexpected appearance of Norton's troubled son, Corey. To save his life and those of countless others, she and her old friend, investigative reporter J.B. Harrell, must unravel a decades-old mystery and face the truth of the nuclear age before it's too late. So that's what it's about. So that leads to the next question. Why did you write that, Dorothy? Well, first, a little bit of background about my other social justice novels. Because nuclear option, like the first 3, is a way to explore deep, intricate, and universal issues of race, class, and power, and expose some truth about the human condition and how we are all impacted by the complex world in which we live. Each of my novels was inspired and grew out of an experience in my life, and each one features a social issue. In Just Mercy, my first, and no, I didn't steal the title from Brian Stevenson, although his book is much better than mine. His came out about 5 months after mine, so I think it was the title, we were in the same zeitgeist about that. Just Mercy, the theme was the death penalty, and it was inspired by research I did on the life stories of the 37 men who were executed by the state of Texas in 1997. My next novel, At the Center, was inspired by my work on an American Indian reservation in northern Minnesota in the early 1970s. And the social justice issue was Indian child welfare. It turned out to be a mystery. And so then all of a sudden I found myself being a mystery writer with a sleuth who is Sylvia Jensen, who is a social worker. Strange how that works. Anyway, so then that inspired Sylvia Jensen's next adventure was Death Uncharted, which was inspired by my teaching in the Bronx, New York in the late 1960s. And the issue is charter schools versus public schools. And so now, nuclear option. Why did I decide to focus on the nuclear threat in this next third Sylvia Jensen mystery? Well, because today I am more frightened by the possibility of nuclear war than I was in 1982. And I was pretty damn scared then. And I also feel alone in that fear. I decided to focus on the nuclear threat because I had many questions, like, why does it seem that so few people are alarmed at the threat of nuclear war today? Are we in denial or overwhelmed by the enormity of so many doomsday crises all at once? Maybe we're just confused by too much information ricocheting nonstop between cable news, social media, and online forums, by more and more propaganda and confusion about the facts, especially in recent years, with national leaders promulgating their own lies, exaggerations, misrepresentations that create public distrust, inaction, and destructive action. Maybe it's because we have a tendency to turn the problem over to the experts and put our trust in our advanced technology. We know that in the 1980s, it was Reagan's Star Wars, and now in the current situation, it's GMDs, ground missile defense systems. I actually have friends who believe that that is actually a workable system. Maybe it's just because we're taking on so many terrible problems of the world in our own separate silos. And that makes us unable to see how all our social justice demands, from disarmament and demilitarization of the police and environmental protection, that they're all inextricably connected with the efforts for nuclear abolition. Maybe we just don't know what to do when faced with such a huge threat as annihilation. Maybe we just fear speaking up, that people will think we're crazy or we're overreacting. We don't want to rock the boat. We are asking a very great deal of our citizens to confront this issue. So my hope in writing Nuclear Option is that by telling a story with a character with whom hopefully people can empathize, a few more people will wake up from sleepwalking through the current nuclear landscape. And I wrote it in the hope that it might contribute in some small way to inspire people to join our efforts to realize the promise of the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that just became law 3 days ago. International law. And it would inspire people to learn more about the issue so that the 9 nuclear countries will find that they need to join that treaty and follow the law and put pressure on our politicians to do that. So putting words on paper, writing a story, it's my way of taking up arms again. It's a way of taking action, and taking action gives me hope. So that's why I chose the nuclear threat. So then it becomes, well, how did I write it? And how do I trace the seeds of the beginning of it? And I do trace the beginnings way back to World War II. That time from 1939 to 1945, that war that took 50 million lives and spread its devastation across the globe to desert sands, Arctic tundras, and Asian jungles. The time of the atomic bomb and the searing ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that forced us to learn how to live in the nuclear age. I grew up during the Cold War, when the fear of nuclear holocaust terrorized us regularly with the duck and cover drills in school. I remember when I was in 6th grade and the alarm went off and we got in a single file and silently went out into the hall, pressed our backs against the walls and tucked our heads between our legs. And when the alarm was over, the teacher told us to silently leave the building and walk home, to not stop and play, to go directly home. And I remember walking home thinking, if a nuclear bomb is going to be dropped on us, why did she send us out into the open? I had nightmares. I know a lot of people did. And when I was in college in Chicago, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I walked around campus for 3 days looking up at the sky, waiting for the end. So I think that's when the seeds of Nuclear Option were planted deep inside me. But then they got submerged along with the terror of that time and forgotten for decades until the nuclear disarmament movement of the 1980s brought my terror to the forefront again by people like Dr. Helen Caldicott and Jonathan Schell, and turned my terror into action. I joined Women Against Military Madness, and at its inception, and Mary White and I, we co-authored a book on empowerment. We created an empowerment group, talked about what we learned in that process. I stayed for a while at the Women's Peace Camp in Seneca Falls, New York. I'm sorry you're not seeing some of these pictures. Nancy Johnston gave me a wonderful picture of WAMM Mother's Day March for Peace, carrying the banner Social Workers for Peace. And some of you might have recognized yourselves in that picture in the early 1980s. And then the Honeywell Project moved from protest to resistance. And you're also missing a wonderful picture of Marv Davidoff, who was the heart and soul of the Honeywell Project. I got involved with that, jumped in with both feet. I was very grateful to have been on the faculty at St. Thomas, where it was possible for me as a professor to get arrested and face the possibility of serving prison time, and had the support of the chair of the department and the administration of the university. And we all know that the Honeywell Corporation produced cluster bombs used in Vietnam and made parts for nuclear weapons. In my novel, some of you appear. Marv Davidoff does, and his name in my novel is Martin Lind. And the Honeywell Project, or the Honeywell Corporation, is the Nectarol Corporation, thanks to Lucia's suggestion, kind of a saccharine title. And it takes place somewhere in the Midwest, state unspecified, in a city named Monroe City, where Sylvia has lived in all of the mystery, the Sylvia Jensen mysteries. So, joining WAMM, becoming involved in the 1980s with WAMM, the Honeywell Project, the nuclear threat was once again thrust into the forefront. And then, once again, we forgot about nuclear weapons for a while. And in 2016, I felt terrorized again. When we had a president who said, we have them, why not use them? So that was it. I knew then that my next Sylvia Jensen mystery had to deal with the nuclear threat. So I started to think about writing it. Well, I couldn't just write a novel that was just my experiences, because Sylvia Jensen may be inspired by my experiences, but she's the person that I wish I were, not the person that I am. And so what kind of an adventure? I needed a story, I needed a plot, I needed new characters. And that's when a colleague of mine who's at the University of California, Fresno, reminded me that in the 1980s, she conducted interviews, hours and hours of interviews with dozens of atomic veterans. And that was it. I was horrified by our destruction of and betrayal of the people of the Marshall Islands and the too often ignored and invisible atomic veterans who were exposed to ionizing radiation as part of our country's nuclear weapons testing starting in 1945. And that was when the character of Norton Kramer, the man Sylvia Jensen was in love with in the 1980s, came to life. And the storyline of Nuclear Option was born. The more research I did about atomic veterans, the more appalled I was to realize that despite my activism in the 1980s, I had heard nothing about them. I'm going to let Norton speak for himself by reading an excerpt at about page 100 in the book when Sylvia and Norton are in an affinity group and they have trespassed at the Nectarol Corporation and are on trial before a jury. And it's Norton's turn to testify. So I'm going to read from Sylvia's point of view. This is in 1984. Norton is sitting in the jury, in the box where you sit next to the judge and looking at the jury. And Sylvia is watching. His eyes roamed from one juror to another. I'm going to tell you my story now. And by doing so, he said, I will be committing a crime against my country. There it was. He was going all the way. He was going to blow the whistle. No matter what that might mean, he was going to do it. On the record, my heart raced. My head was ready to explode. I couldn't stop him. And strangely, I was no longer sure I wanted to. I joined the Army when I was 18, he said. I was just a pimply-faced kid with nothing but little wisps of beard on my face and a desire to serve my country. He bounced a smile at the jurors, and they bounced nervous half smiles back at him. I was sent to the South Pacific. He leaned so far forward, he was now teetering on the edge of his seat. I witnessed 11 nuclear explosions there, with no goggles or special clothing for protection, only instructions to turn away and cover my face. No one mentioned the danger of radioactivity. He waited a few seconds before continuing. It isn't that they didn't know. Scientists knew the risks from the earliest days of Los Alamos. They knew our military personnel got blistered and scarred after the bombings in Japan. They knew their hair fell out. They knew they had convulsions. They knew they had radiation poisoning, but they never told them. They never told us either. They wanted to see how we would react, what the blasts would do to us, whether our equipment would function. Norton's voice expanded and contracted, expanded again, and finally rose to a crescendo. We were their guinea pigs, nothing but guinea pigs. His voice shot up in the air and then fell to the floor. And then they dropped us like hot potatoes. His hands crashed down on the wooden railing in front of him. Silence descended. Observers in the courtroom shook their heads. The man in the second row scribbled notes, his pencil digging holes in the paper. The jurors looked stunned. I was stunned. Norton raised his hands, palms facing the jurors. It's not your fault you didn't know. It's been a very carefully kept secret. It's true. By telling you, I have just violated the Nuclear Radiation and Secrecy Agreements Act. I have just committed treason. I can cite the law for you if you'd like. His back stiffened and his chin jutted out. Well, today the jig is up. The words spilled from his mouth. The secrecy ends now, right here, right now. Light and shadow roiled in front of my eyes like a burst blood vessel had just released dozens of competing thoughts and feelings in my head all at once. My chest swelled with pride and admiration for Norton's courage. It constricted with fear about what was going to happen to him. It shriveled with guilt for having doubted him. It made me want to protect him with my life. So learning about the conspiracy of silence and what I've learned since about the numbers of people on United States land who were exposed, who generation after generation are experiencing the consequences, the fights that the atomic veterans had to wage in order to get benefits, to get any kind of recognition, to learn that when they got sick, when they got cancer and other illnesses, they couldn't tell their doctors that they'd been exposed to radiation without violating the law, without committing treason. And even if they did, there was nothing in their military record to confirm it. So I researched the Association of Atomic Veterans. You can look at their website. I've got resources at the end of the book about it. And that's how it came about that the plot involved atomic veterans. And I want to read a couple of excerpts from you so you get a sense of the story. And some of you may wonder who you are in the book, because many of you who were involved in WAMM back then in the 80s and the Honeywell Project, you are in the book. Your spirit is definitely in the book. And sometimes I actually took characters that began with one or a combination, a collage of several of you, and made them into a character. So I want to read a couple of excerpts that give you a sense of Sylvia and the situation in 2019, in the present. The book actually begins with a prologue, which is an excerpt from Norton Kramer's journal that you could read on my website if you don't have the book yet. And he wrote it on May 4th, 1956. But chapter 1, when the story begins, is in 2019. And Sylvia Jensen has gone to a church in Monroe City to a memorial service for an anti-war peace activist who she very, very much admires. A peace activist who you learn more about in chapter 1, who is truly a conglomeration of several of the wonderful, strong WAMM women. And I'm sure you could figure out whose spirit is in the character of the person who had died. And Sylvia is at the memorial service. I want to give you a sense of where she is at the beginning of the story. So I'm just going to read the first page of the novel. Sylvia Jensen, long time no see. Martin Lind still looks like a stereotype, albeit an aging one. No matter the season, even like now in early summer, he wears the same brown sport coat with patches on the elbow, now frayed around the edges, the same threadbare British ivy hat that he's worn like a uniform for 50-some years of his life. I wave once, tuck a strand of gray hair into the bun at the back of my head, and scrunch down in the pew. It's not that I'm unhappy to see Martin. I like him a lot and have the utmost respect for him and what he's doing. I just want to make sure that seeing him, as well as other activists here, doesn't arouse in me a feeling that I should be doing more. Not that any of them can or want to make me feel that way. It's my issue, not theirs. One grounded in an old childhood sense of not being enough that in the past pushed me to do too much and then left me feeling always that it still wasn't enough. I don't want to get sucked back into that pattern tonight. It's an old and deeply rooted character defect I've worked hard to overcome. And now that my life is better than ever, more serene and accepting, I intend to keep it that way. Bertha Pickering, 1920 to 2018, is projected in bold black letters on a giant screen at the front of the sanctuary. And there's a photo of Bertha smiling under the weight of her signature hat, its floppy brim covered with dozens of what she called her kick-ass buttons. She was in her 90s when the picture was taken, but looks 10 years younger than I do now at 77. So that's introducing you to Sylvia at the beginning of the book. She's sitting there watching people come into the sanctuary, and she recognizes many of them. She's known, hasn't seen them in many years. There's people outside dressed in American flags shouting, "Keep America safe, keep America safe." Counter protesters. She remembers the day she met Bertha 39 years before, when she was holding something in her hand that looked like a hollowed out metal ball, which was a cluster bomb shell from Nectarol Corporation. Some of you remember that story that Marv Davidoff would tell. And then as she's sitting there, I want to read one more paragraph because that will introduce you to Corey Kramer, who is Norton's son. A man in a nondescript tan button-down shirt and brown chinos passes by, leaving behind a trace of aqua velva aftershave lotion that invades my nostrils and moves directly to my heart. The man heads down the middle aisle, turning his head from side to side in search of a place to sit. A full beard, dark brown, almost black. A ponytail halfway down his back. Green eyes. His green eyes. But of course, it can't be him. Norton died more than 30 years ago. So who is this man who looks like him, who has the same distinctive gait, the same slight backward sweep of his left leg, who wears the same cologne? He squeezes into a pew several rows in front of me, just as a ghost-like hush falls over the cavernous room. So that's a little tease of Sylvia, Corey, and Norton. And my hope is that people who are involved in the peace movement, who get it that nuclear weapons are a threat and that we need to get this treaty ratified and abolish nuclear weapons from the face of this earth forever, will be able to use this novel and other books like this to help other people see that there's a problem. I hope it's a good story. I hope it's a good whodunit and that it's a page turner. At the same time, I hope that readers will consume information about the nuclear threat that they didn't have before, and maybe be able to acknowledge their own deep feelings of fear and horror as normal reactions to the uncontrolled proliferation of arms and the perilous situation our world is in. Because when we're able to acknowledge our fear, we are able to take action. So, I am so sorry you didn't see all the wonderful slides that went with that. I had heads in the sand. I had all kinds of great cartoons and pictures. But that's basically what's it about? Why did I write it? And a little bit about how I wrote it, and a little taste of my writing. So I think we have time for some
Yes.
questions, comments.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dorothy. Thank you. And I'm sorry too, we did a rehearsal with the slides, and everything worked very smoothly. I'm not sure what happened, but we do have a few questions. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat. Sophia has arranged a Google Google document, and I do have a couple questions here that have come in. And one is about the atomic vets, because this did happen in Nuclear Option, the story.
Mhm.
And the question is it common for the cancers and radiation problems to manifest themselves in offspring rather than in the atomic vet, or to skip a generation, like the grandchild, onto the grandchildren of the atomic vets? Is that common, or is that sometimes happen?
I know that sometimes happens from some of the research I've done in reading the experiences from some atomic veterans that you can find on the Association for Atomic Veterans website, for one. But I really don't know. I think there's many different illnesses, and the research that that they did or did not do is, what can you prove? Cause and effect is difficult to prove, to prove with research. But no, I think there were atomic veterans who developed symptoms themselves and died of cancers, and their children had. There's a scene in the book where a group of family members of atomic veterans who are very upset and want to right the wrong and call attention are telling Sylvia their story. And they're telling stories about how, well, one man is an atomic veteran himself, and he's telling the story about how his children and grandchildren developed strange kinds of health problems, not just cancers. So I don't know any more than that about the fact that Norton died of cancer, and then his grandson had the same type of cancer, was fictional license, not based on a real situation. You're muted, so Lucia.
Yes.
Okay.
There is a question about what actions we might take. And one of the slides we had prepared was some phone numbers for you to call. But you know that, oh, nope, maybe Sophia has the phone numbers. The Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was, of course, just passed on, I think, the 22nd. And that means it is international law. However, the 9 nations that are armed with nuclear weapons have not signed on to that. They were not part of the huge number of nations that signed on to the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Still, we can call, write, or send email to your senators, the US senators and representatives, and press them to initiate and support congressional ratification of the UN proclamation to prohibit nuclear weapons. And for you, those of you who are in Minnesota, in probably most of us in the Twin Cities area and suburbs, our metro region, I put up here we've put up the District 2, 3, 4, and 5 representative phone numbers, and also for Senators Klobuchar and Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith. So if you don't have those, jot them down or go to their websites and send them an email or any way you want to do it. So take that action, and it's the right thing to do, you know. So I have another question here. Oh, I have a couple other questions. It might be that, there's maybe a little information about the Union of Concerned Scientists. Do you think that the Union of Concerned Scientists is an outgrowth of the atomic veterans situation? Dorothy.
Gee, I don't know if it's an outgrowth. I don't know the exact year that the Union of Concerned Scientists was founded, or the history of it. I do know that they have moved the doomsday clock the closest to midnight that it has ever been, which is one thing that terrified me, and that they're really pushing for the 9 nuclear countries to ratify. Now, I do want to say something about that. When the push was on and it was getting closer to reaching the 50 countries that is required of a UN treaty before it will become international law, our own government, in pre-COVID Orange, I'm sorry, I can't say the name, pre-him, was really pushing that we discourage the treaty from being ratified. And I think we can expect that our government will be pushing, as they already have, the countries that have signed on to the treaty, there's maybe 53 of them, to remove their ratification. So we all know what we're up against. It's not going to be easy, but you know, we banned chemical weapons, banned landmines, and we can ban nuclear weapons. And it was a fight. It's a fight because if you follow the money, you know that there's a whole industrial complex like Honeywell as part of it that is very powerful and very resourced. And so I'm just hoping that we'll use all the tools we have, including fiction, because I know when I talk to my friends about the facts about nuclear weapons, their eyes do glaze over pretty quickly. It's like, I don't want to hear it. It's too technical. I don't know, all the reasons that I was guessing at the beginning of my presentation. So I'm hoping that through stories, there was On the Beach, that woke a lot of people up. And then in the 80s, there was the movie the TV show the day after that many millions of us watched and got horrified and activated because of. So in some small way, I'm hoping, a book like this will play a role in it too.
Dorothy, I have a couple of questions. One is, a couple are about the book, but there's one question about what WAMM and Veterans for Peace members, especially the members of the End War Committee of WAMM, have been doing in the campaign here in Minnesota to raise awareness and get signatures on a petition to support the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And I wonder if Marie or Sarah or Carol, someone from the End War Committee might just want to, or one of the vets might want to mention something about what is being done, or tell the tale about every town in Minnesota. Is there someone who can speak to that?
I'm Marie Brown, and I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. The NWAR Committee and the Veterans for Peace had a petition that we took to all the cities in the state of Minnesota. And actually, the vets did the most work on it. And we got a signature for every incorporated city in the state of Minnesota requesting that our government ban nuclear weapons. We have also been working with the city councils of St. Louis Park, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Mankato, Grand Rapids, and several other cities around the state to try to get them to pass resolutions to support the treaty, because we feel that it's going to have to come from the bottom. It is not going to come from the top. And we have written articles, and we have articles in several community papers now. The Camden News is going to print it. Southside Pride has printed an article. It's some of the cities around the state are trying to get letters to the editor. So there's a whole lot going on here in Minnesota in the attempt to support this treaty. And of course, the state of Minnesota also has a bill, both in the House and the Senate, to support this treaty. They've had it actually for the last 3 or 4 years, and they have had trouble getting it out of committee because the Republicans will not let it out of committee. But we could just keep working away and hammering away. We've also contacted the churches, several churches, and asked them to put an article on their website. Those are things that come to mind.
Thank you, Marie. Yeah, and when you said every city in Minnesota, every incorporated town, I think it was. I mean, some small towns.
Yes.
And the vets, and especially Steve, I think, Steve McCune went to a lot of little places I'm sorry to say I haven't really heard of. I'm sure Biwabic was among them, though.
I hope so.
I'm sure it was.
May I say, if when the pandemic is over and we're still in this struggle, I think we're going to have to take to the streets again. And I think we're going to have to do move to resistance again. And I'd be very happy to come back to Minnesota and join you all in that.
Good. Actually, on the day of the treaty was ratified and or made law in the United Nations, there was a group that did go out to the Honeywell office in Plymouth, Minnesota, and rallied there for a period of time. So that, for old time's sake. There's a question about in the book, Sylvia Sylvia talks about having guilty feelings during that funeral that you described, or the memorial. Sylvia mentioned having guilty feelings because she wasn't doing activism at that time. And so the question is that kind of a theme of the book? And was guilt a large part of your own experience? Because Dorothy, you have done a lot.
Yeah, that's a very subtle way of asking, are you Sylvia Jensen? Sylvia Jensen is not me. Sylvia Jensen does things that I don't do, but the sentiments of Sylvia Jensen are very much mine, some of them. And guilt is definitely one of them. It's and I'm not sure I'm alone in this. It's like the problems are so huge and it seems like our actions are so small. And I remember when Mary White and I were writing the book on empowerment, we kept writing things like, no action is too small, everything counts, it's the building up of everybody taking action that counts, it's not just you. And, you know, my lifelong struggle is that, is trying to believe that, that no action is too small. So yeah, that's, you know, but the thing about Sylvia Jensen, the character, is that she has that feeling. She's a very dysfunctional person, and she's unstoppable. I mean, she will go to any length. So she does almost lose her life. And she neglects her own physical safety, and she gets in there and she just does and does and does. That part is that part is not me. I'm pretty good at setting boundaries and saying this is what I can do. And I have a friend, actually, my a writing coach that I have, who has been working with me ever since I decided to move from academic writing to fiction, which is a whole different way of writing. He always says to me, you need to do what only you can do. And I think that's kind of a good slogan for people who are working for peace and nuclear disarmament, is you can just do what only you can do. And that's any number of things, because we're all unique and we all will do things in our own way. And yes, we can all sign petitions, but only you can get certain people to sign petitions or to talk to certain people because of who you are and who you know. So, yeah, I had one person who reviewed the book and said she could really relate to, you know, who she wanted to be and who she felt she really was in terms of making a contribution to the world. And so I don't, yeah, enough said about that.
So Dorothy, I have a question for you from someone who, well, it's going in a different direction about what advice do you have for a writer who is wishing to publish a first book?
Oh, I have lots and lots of advice. How much time do we have? The first thing I would say is that the first time you write the book, you're telling yourself the story. You're just telling yourself the story. Don't worry about what anybody else is going to think or how well it's written or how anybody's going to judge it. That's just, for me, that's just me figuring out what the story is. Later, I can worry about how the reader will read the story and get what I want to say. And then it changes dramatically. And the other piece of advice I would give is do it because you have to do it. Not because anybody told you to, or you want something, just because it's in you to do it. Just write it. Don't worry about getting published. That's another story. Don't worry about having to do events like this and have your slideshow not work. That's another story. It's just write it because you need to write it. You have something to say, just do it. And what happens after that will happen after that.
This is super. I think that takes care of our questions. Remember to take action, call Congress, write, call. Sophia's putting the addresses, or rather the phone numbers, in the chat. So in case you don't have those, but I know that many of you do have those, go ahead and send an email. And you know, the cumulative effect. So
And there's two books left, so you could make a big contribution and get a free one, you see? Only $100.
that's right. And thank you, Dorothy, for providing 20 books and enabling WAMM to receive donations of, well, I think somebody sent $200 and said they only wanted one book. So
All right.
and one person made a donation and for herself and as a birthday gift for a friend. And it's just been, for those who have been able to do that, it's been great fun. And we've been delivering them around. So thank you so much for your generosity. I'm sorry that we didn't have the slideshow because it does add a different dimension, but I think your things went along. I want to say that you did focus a lot in the presentation about the nuclear issues, but the book itself, the storyline has a lot of good balance to it, and the characterizations, and there are other characters who are come in, and there's scary stuff in it aside from the nuclear scary stuff. So it's
And there's a love story.
there is, yes,
There's a
of
love
course,
story.
a love story.
Thank you all for coming. I really am wishing we could have seen each other more clearly and all of that, but thank you so much for coming. It's been an honor to be with you.
Thank you all for coming, and we can probably stop the recording and the live streaming and just have a little bit of conversation among us. If you would like to do that, say hi to Dorothy if you haven't seen her for a long time. And